You know how messed up and chaotic Night City is? Well, what if I told you that corporations messed with the ocean too? My name is XP Lovecat, and today I'm going to be walking through the fourth mission in the Tales of the Red Cyberpunk Red book, and this mission is called The Drummer and the Whale. This is a one-shot mission for the Cyberpunk Red RPG, and it took me and my players about 4.5 hours to run through, and I would say an average game is going to take you around 5. One of the sections my players went through a little bit quicker than expected, so stick around to hear about that. The basic setup is that Rex Royale, who is a fixer, has reached out because one of his clients is looking for a crew to do an easy job down by the bay. Now, as I'm sure your players know, nothing is easy in Night City, but I'm sure they all have their reasons for getting a few extra EBs. Now, from this point forward, there will be spoilers. I'm going to walk through this mission in detail and go over my top tips for running it. My first tip for you is that you may need to brush up on your cyberpunk history. And in order to do that, the best way is to just open your rulebook in PDF format and Control F any terms that you want to learn more about or that you're not sure what they are. The background for this mission starts before the Fourth Corporate War. So at that time, two major corporations, Arasaka and Sino, were working together to have a joint project where they were going to collect resources from the ocean floor. Now, they did some cool tech stuff and made this automated. And now, boom, Fourth Corporate War comes and there's a bunch of casualties. And unfortunately, the people that knew about this project passed away, and so there wasn't a lot of people that were aware of its coordinates or how it was programmed or even where to find it in the ocean. So it kind of just got dropped, but guess what? They had programmed these things to collect resources, so they've been doing that ever since. Enter now the IPG, which is the Interesting Patterns Group, which is a fancy way of saying it's a group of nerds who just really like data. And Drummer, he's kind of the leader of this group. He's been analyzing a particular pattern, and he's found ULF signals that are in a certain sequence and is linked to some cargo containers that have washed ashore. So he reaches out to hire a group to find this cargo container and help him figure out the mystery behind this ULF signal and what pattern is happening under the ocean. And something I love about this mission is how pure Drummer and the IPG is. There is a ton of chaos going on in Night City and a lot of people that are just there to cause problems, but the IPG is very pure. They are just interested and curious and want to get to the bottom of this mystery, but really they're not in it for any diabolical or evil means. The first major location is Rusty's Dive Shack. Now this is where you're going to meet Drummer, and when your players walk in, the scene before them is a few sailors who are actually bullying Drummer. Now, like I said before, Drummer is kind of a nerd, so he's not really sticking up for himself. This is a cool opportunity to see how your characters react and give them a chance to possibly have a combat or a fight of some sort, although my players were able to resolve it with words. So then the next section is them actually talking to Drummer. Drummer is going to spew a lot of technical terms at them, but the essence of what's going on is he wants them to go down by the bay, find a cargo container, and any identifying markers, RFID tags, serial numbers, barcodes, anything that's going to give him more information to figure out this pattern. That transitions the group to the beach location. So at the beach, the way that this is set up is it's 6 different segments that the players are going to have to investigate, and there's certain rules for what DV value they each have to get to be able to find the cargo container. Now, while they're rolling to rummage through what's on the beach, there is a hazard table, which I absolutely loved. This was great to add some variety and figure out what was actually happening at the beach. Now, a tip for you is if you would like to expand the hazard table, that may be useful, just to make sure that there's no repeats as your players are going through and rolling. Another tip here is that you may need to adjust the way these DV values work if you have a smaller group size. It seems to work well if you have 3 to 5 players. 3 might be a little bit on the low end, but if you have 2 players, I would highly recommend that you change how this mechanic works in the game so that they're not waiting forever to make sure that it's going to be a success. My other major tip at the beach is to make sure that you don't share your DV values with your players. I know some GMs usually just tell them what DV they need to hit, but in this case, I would keep that to yourself just to allow some flexibility. The beach is going to be somewhere where you want to figure out if people are still having fun, if it's taking too long, or if they get it right away and they didn't really get to experience the beach. I feel like it would be good just to have in your back pocket some of your timing expectations and make sure that you have flexibility by not sharing your DV values. Players will eventually find the container, and inside are raw materials. And it may not look like much to your players, but if they do have a success on a roll, then they're able to figure out that it can be used to create ceramic armor. So this is a cool bonus because Drummer and Fife don't really want the raw materials, they just want to figure out what the containers are coming from. So your players might end up with a bit of extra cash. This would lead to them reporting back to Drummer, but if you are just running this as a one-shot, I would combine them getting to report back to Drummer and meeting Fife in the same day. It's written in the mission that there's a couple days in between, which is cool if you've inserted this into the campaign and you want to experience more of that downtime with your players. But if you are just doing this as a one-shot, you can go ahead and combine that and get rid of the extra 2 days in the middle. The next major location is Yum Sang, which is a karaoke bar, and this is where they're going to meet Fife, who is the next person to give the part of the mission. This is a good time to point out that you should go to the back of the Tales of the Red book because that's where they have biographies of all the different NPCs. I mentioned this specifically for Fife because they are a very interesting character. You'll read in their bio that they're a biosculpted half seal, half reptile with human hands thing that can live in the ocean. So let's just say Fife likes to keep his in-person interactions to a minimum, so your players are actually going to meet Fife through a holodeck. And it was really cool to keep his true form a secret for as long as possible, because when I did reveal this to my players much later in the mission, they were so confused and interested to see what this thing actually was. So that is a tip as well, to make sure to hide what Fife actually looks like and reveal it much later in the mission. Another tip for playing Fife is to make them really excitable. So I'm going to read a couple of the dialogue bits that are in this mission just to give you an example of how I played with this character. We all love puzzles. We've unscrambled old voicemails from EBM satellites. Drummer and I found the lost ships of the Busan Exodus based on public records. He's even developed safe ways of getting some data out of old Ihara Grub-based systems, though it's often pretty jumbled. Drummer asked me to help with this whole whale hunt. I love it when he gets excited. And I know he's onto something, but he's sad now. I hate that. He was so sure he had the trail and now the water's gone still for him. He says there's no way to find it now. I keep telling him that there must have been another container, but he's gone sad and boring and wants to sulk. So I went and did the math myself. So that's just an example of how to play Fife, but it's pretty clear in the books that they're excitable and have a lot of energy, so that was fun for me to play. The next part is finding the second container and where the source is for these. So that requires the submarine. And you're in luck because Fife has a submarine that the crew can use. And now comes the underwater level of the game. And this is where Fife has a submarine that the players can use, fortunately equipped with a holodeck so that they can communicate with the players as they're underwater. The players are required to go through these tunnels to get to this second cargo container, and they will quickly learn that the submarine is not going to fit in this tunnel. So they have to work with the ROVs that are equipped to the submarine to actually get to them or swim themselves. But honestly, the tunnels are the least of their problems. Enter in the Militech drones. So Militech is a big corporation who has their eye on these cargo containers as well. Now, of course, your players don't really know how important this is for Militech to find and recover, but they have some pretty valuable resources. Militech is first going to start with their drones to try and intercept your players getting to the second cargo container. And if that doesn't work, they're going to send out a diver team to try and capture the crew. And this is where I get to the biggest problem with this scenario, and that is your players not having a lot of clues to be able to puzzle out what is happening and why Militech is here. In addition, they don't have a strong motivation to actually get to the second cargo container because although Fife and Drummer are paying them, it's not enough to make it a fight against Militech. They're likely just going to bow down to whatever Militech needs because they don't want to get themselves killed over a few Eurobucks. In addition to that, if they do get captured on the SS McDonaldson, and the trader from Arasaka comes and releases them, my players were just confused because they didn't understand what had happened up until that point, and that Arasaka knew that this was still happening and they wanted control of the program that was collecting these resources. So it was more of just things were happening to my players, but they didn't understand it and they didn't really know how to react because they didn't have the background details for what was going on in this mission. At some point, the Arasaka trader is going to open the jail cell and let your crew out. And they're going to say, Arasaka thanks you for helping us find our lost asset. Okay, cool. But my players at that point were like, you're welcome. Like, we didn't know really what we were doing, so okay, now what do we do? So to avoid some of this confusion, I don't think it's necessary to, of course, give them everything, because Drummer and Fife are also not sure what's going on, not sure what these cargo containers actually mean. But something to consider adding is once they enter the SS McDonaldson ship, have them overhear the captain talking about what these cargo containers are, so they have some sort of information to be able to make decisions once they are released from their cell. Included in this would be explaining what the contents of this second container are, because there's actually some stuff worth quite a lot of money. So that would be an extra motivation for your players to go after and try to retrieve the second cargo container instead of just abandoning it. Now, if they were to find out what was in it and they still decide to abandon it, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do as well. And what I did like about this scenario is it had different options for your endings. So it wrote out what would happen based on different events that unfolded for the different situations. So make sure you utilize that when coming up with your conclusion for this mission. I mentioned before where my players went through a section a little bit quicker than I expected, and that was definitely when they got to the SS McDonaldson. They ended up getting out of their cells and sweet talking one of the guards who was trying to contain them on the submarine. So they escaped and they quickly left to the surface without getting the second cargo container. Although I felt like that was a perfectly reasonable ending, my players did end up feeling like they didn't understand what had happened. But overall, we did have a great time. The underwater combat was super fun and a variety that felt different from other Night City kind of missions because we had a different setting. So I thought that was interesting to explore the beach. These characters, Drummer and Fife, were super interesting and fun to play. And this variety was just helpful for mixing up gameplay, and we had a great time. When deciding what kind of group this is best for, keep in mind that this is a less combat-heavy mission. We ended up not having any combat when we were playing. There are a couple opportunities that this might happen, but for us, it didn't end up that way. So if you like a group that really, really loves doing combat, then this might not be the best fit for you. Otherwise, if you'd like to try it out, I think a Netrunner is really helpful for this mission, and someone with underwater tech skills as well might help you move things along and have different variety of options when they're actually underwater and how they go about solving different problems. I also felt like this would be good to pop into a campaign to add some variety, and there's also built-in places for downtime, which is important when you're trying to develop characters and develop this setting where people are just trying to make it. They're just trying to get Eurobucks and make it to the next day to pay rent. So overall, I did wish my players got to experience the background information a bit more so that the Arasaka trader was more impactful. That being said, we did have a great time with the underwater aspect and the variety in this mission, so I think it's definitely worth checking out. This, again, was in the Tales of the Red book, which will be linked in the description below. I also have additional content on Cyberpunk Red if you'd like to check out what I have to say about this RPG and my top tips for running the game. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!